So I'm talking to you guys. I know who you are, Shelley Acker and Sutherland, the two women who were the art department team for my film Bernie Langille Wants to Know What Happened to Bernie Langille. And I'm going to ask you guys some questions about what this process was like for you. But a little bit of background for anybody who might be watching this is that we met about 10 years ago when I was really getting into the art of miniature things. I was quite taken with the work of a criminologist named Francis Glesner Lee, who was recreating real life crime scenes in miniature. And at the same time, I went to this place out in the country in Nova Scotia, where a bunch of women were gathering who build tiny things together. And I was doing a radio doc for CBC, and you were two of those people that I met at that time. So that's how we know one another. And 10 years ago, I said to you both, if I can get a film off the ground where we do the documentary reenactments with miniatures, would you both be a part of that? And you said yes. And a decade later, here we are. So I guess my first question that I would ask you both is, and Shelley, maybe I'll start with you, is how long have you been doing miniatures? How did you get into doing miniatures?
I started doing miniatures 22, 23 years ago now, I think. I just discovered somehow that I really liked small things. And it started with, playing with clay, the oven-baked clay, Sculpey Fimo, and moved on to a dollhouse and moved on and moved on and moved on. You just keep learning and you find other miniaturists and you learn from them. And I totally forget what your question was. How did I get into miniatures? And am I kind of on the right track still? Being in miniatures doesn't mean you have a good memory or a good train of thought, but it does mean that you love to talk about what you do.
And Iris, how long have you been doing miniatures?
I would say I've been doing miniatures about 23, 24 years. I met Shelley when she first started and came to Camp Minnehaha when it was at a cottage in Harborville. And I had already been doing miniatures about 2-3 years prior to that. How I got into it is that my sister used to do it, and I always admired it. And I thought, well, maybe this is something I should try to get into. I was painting at that time and had painted for about 10 years. And I thought, well, I'm getting tired of this, time for a switch. And that's what took me over. My first project was miniature mercantile building. And it took me over a year to do it because I didn't really know what I was doing.
Mercantile building? What's mercantile building?
It's an old-fashioned store, general store that would be in your community with everything in it. Post office, you name it, it had it.
I see. So then, so at Camp Minnehaha, which is the camp where once a year miniaturists come together, they build tiny things. That's where I met you guys. Then I come along, I say, hey, if I can get this project off the ground, would you guys be a part of it? And you both said yes. So when we started working on this project, on the Bernie Langille project, we didn't know right off the bat how many sets were going to be involved. In the end, it turned out to be 18 different sets based on the Langille family story. Can you talk to me about what it was like to start that process of recreating the story through these sets? Whoever wants to go first.
Shelley?
Sure. I remember those first conversations. Was here's the concept, and we're going after some funding. We've got some support already, and we've got the story part of it. How many sets? Well, maybe a dozen. Maybe a dozen might be maybe 15. What sets are they? Well, we'll figure that out as we go along. It's basically, as the story evolves, we'll figure out what the sets are. But I remember, Jackie, you had the idea for a few that you knew you would want. We started with those, and we didn't really have a time frame, and even if we did, it pretty quickly got blown up by COVID. So we worked away on the early sets and took advantage of what we already knew. We did a lot of research to figure out exactly what these places that were based in 1968, what they would look like. So it was nice to have the time to do the research on what a military PMQ looks like, for example.
Yeah, sorry to butt in there, but we weren't just creating any sets. These had to be historically accurate to a family at a place in time. So also, how did you decide who was doing what? Talk to me about how you are as a team. Who does what? How do you divvy it up?
If I'll start, and then Iris, you can chime in. But if it's about building a structure, that's where my happy place is. I like to, build the structure, build a building, build a room. I also like to build some furniture, those sorts of things. Iris can speak more to sort of her on the other end of that as things that need to be fabricated, our fabric, our dolls. And in the middle, we just collaborate. We collaborate throughout, but we collaborate in particular on everything else that's in the middle. I'll let Iris take over from there.
Yeah. Yes, we do collaborate a lot, and the research was a combined effort between the two of us. And that was extremely interesting because it gave us an idea of what size of PMQs were going to be, for example, what the furniture, what the decor, all of that. My expertise and absolute passion is detail. I love to make things look like they're real. I love to add paint and shadowing and color and, use everyday items to come up with something that is factual. Jackie, when you had asked me, can I make a trachea tube for a doll that's 6 inches big? I thought, okay. Yes, I can do that. And that was just one example of many. Can you do? And the imagination just explodes. Yes, we'll make it work. We can do it.
Yeah, because you make a lot of your own, like this tracheotomy machine that you're talking about that we had on the Bernie Langille doll for when he's in the hospital. So there's a number of different sets. There's the PMQs, that's the exterior home where the military family, the Langilles, lived on the base of CFB Gagetown. Then there's interior in the homes. There's also hospital sets we did. We did outdoor sets where the train tracks at Shearwater, things like that. And then you had to also make objects within all of those sets. And oftentimes you will do that out of found objects. You will take objects from real life, like eyedroppers and butter trays that come in restaurants and things like that. So I was always fascinated that the miniature world is actually hidden and existing and living within the big world, and you just have to be a miniaturist and have the eye for it.
Yes.
That's exactly it. It's about illusion. You don't need to necessarily actually build. You don't need to build a working trach. You don't need to build even working drawers sometimes in a cabinet. You need to make it look like they're working drawers and working doors. You can have working lights or non-working lights. And that's part of the research that we like to do to get that detail. And one of the really, I guess, opportunities that we had in this case is that we had some home movies that the Langille family provided that we were able to use to recreate an apartment in Halifax that was part of the story. And we were able to figure out exactly what the furniture looked like, what the fabric on the furniture was, what pictures were on the wall, what was the clock like, what types of plants did they have, what type of music did they listen to, just anything you could figure out. And that's, to Iris's comment about the detail, that just, rings all of our detail bells, just to say, yes, this is what they had. And then how can we create it? How can we create the illusion of working TV trays? How can we create the illusion of a working VCR? And how do we make it look era appropriate? It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so there's two different kind of approaches to this. There's sometimes we had, for instance, there was a surgery room, and so that you guys were basically doing research about what surgery rooms in 1968 looked like, so you could recreate what possibly a surgery room at the VG looked like in the late 60s. But then there were also more specific ones where it's essentially like we're creating Larry Langille, one of the elder sons of Corporal Langille. We're creating his apartment that he lived in as an adult, and that is actually a specific place that had specific pictures on the wall. And like you're saying, you had photos and blurry home movies, and you would kind of take the fragments of what you could see and when you put it together, our Bernie Langille had actually been in that apartment as a child, and when he saw it recreated in miniature, his jaw dropped, because he said, that's the apartment I remember walking into. And you guys only had fragments and scraps to work with at that time. I thought that was so neat.
Well, that was one of the advantages, that we did have scraps. We did have some home movies to work from.
Right.
You know, that was almost easier than, you know, a PMQ where we didn't have any images. We had a few photos that might catch a corner of a room, but we used what we had. We knew what you needed in the set, and we, you know, again, research. I don't know how you do these things without the internet, because that just is our saving grace today. We're images for information. But we were able to, through friends that Iris has, confirm that our calculations, if you will, on the size of rooms in a PMQ, as much as they didn't really seem to make sense to us, they were actually correct. And these are small rooms. So we used every avenue available to us, you know, literature, internet, personal experience, to try and recreate what we didn't have images or video of. So, you know, there's an awful lot of opportunities out there.
I refer to you, Shelley, as the architect, and you, Iris, as the mistress of blood and gore. But it was you, Iris, that, just like you were saying, that the details within the interior that were really, I mean, both of you handled them, but they were really your domain, Iris, because you were the ones who would ask me questions like, how many packs of cigarettes do we think Bernie and his wife Annie smoked in a day, because that affects the paint on the walls. I remember you asking me how often did I think Larry Langille, as a young adult, watered the plants in his home, because that affected how wilted or not the tiny plants you were recreating in his home were going to be. Details like that were just wonderful. So can you also talk to me about what was the most challenging set that you had to do? I know we had one set that had two different scales in it. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, I can speak to that one a little bit. I mean, Iris is the master of building it. It was a huge set, so I don't want to steal her thunder. She can come in on that, but it was a challenge. It was a very large piece. You know, we're talking several feet long and a few feet wide, outdoors, so a lot of landscaping.
That's right. And sorry to cut in there, Shelley, but we're talking about recreating basically a section of base Gagetown in a city.
Yes. Yeah, so it's an outdoor space that encompassed, you know, woodlands and some open space, maybe some water. And it needed to serve a couple of purposes, but the key one was for viewing an event that may or may not have been observed. I don't know how much you want to give away of the story, so I'll be a little bit vague, but you know, we work in scale, and our most common scale is 1/12, which means that it's 1 foot in real life is 1 inch in miniature world, so 1/12 of real life. And the vast majority of what we were doing was in 1/12 scale, including all the dolls that represent all the characters. And in this particular case, the characters were going to be, you know, sort of eavesdropping or dropping in on a scene that they encountered when they're out at night in these woods. And it required military vehicles, which we built from kits, which were in 1/24 scale, so half the size. So obviously, if you put a 1/12 scale doll beside a 1/24 scale vehicle, he's going to be a giant. That doesn't work. So it was very, carefully choreographed, I guess, and filmed with the director of photography, figuring out how to get that perspective of a large man looking at a small truck and not make him look large.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so that,
and you had for that, Iris, was you built basically the set was 2 different parts.
that's correct. Yes, 2 different parts, and in one part it was for the 1/12th, and we needed trees and landscaping that suited the characters and looked like there was enough mature vegetation to film it going through that. And so the way the paths work, we had to make sure that the trees were removable or portions of it so that you could get the camera in and around. We had running water. The challenge there was getting the perspective right for the camera, and so that it looked real. And dressing the dolls, well, dressing the 1/12th scale dolls was enough. But when I got down to 1/4 scale, or 1/2 scale rather, trying to put little army uniforms on them with the little epaulets and the buttons and the hats, because I had to redress all the dolls. Some of them did come with army garb on them, but no hats, no boots, and it was all wrong. It wasn't according to 1968. So I thought, okay, well, I went to the Army surplus store and got Army clothing and went from there, went to town and just dressed these dolls. But that was the most challenging set for me.
And in fact, and speaking of dolls, we had about 50 dolls, I think, 50 figures that appear throughout the movie, and you dressed all of them in era of
Yes.
clothing. That's quite an undertaking.
And modified their faces innumerable times.
Yes.
Poor Bernie, especially. Bernie with bruises, Bernie without bruises, Bernie alive, Bernie dead, Bernie asleep, Bernie awake.
Exactly. And
Dolls. Yeah.
one of the challenging parts for me as well was the nurses and the doctors in the OR. It was okay to put the hats and the garb on them, but what am I going to do about rubber gloves? What were the rubber gloves that looked like back then? Were they white? Were they green? And the color of their uniforms as well. So that was a real stumbling block for me. And I tried many different things. And I finally ended up using shrink wrap that you use on electrical connections. And I just happened to have some green stuff. And so I just shrunk wrapped those little suckers on their hands and cut the fingers out so they had fingers. And it worked out great, especially with blood on them.
They were perfect. They were perfect.
And Shelley, you as the architect, constructing these sets, especially some of the exterior buildings that we had, which were so beautifully done, but you had to construct all the sets so that they could accommodate filming.
Yes.
The windows had to all the walls had to be able to come out, the ceiling had to be able to come out.
Normally we're trying to create a very stable building unit, whether it's a room or a dollhouse or whatever you create, and you want it to be nice and stable. So you still want these to be stable, but they need to be flexible. You need to be able to take out any of the walls and the ceiling. So you need non-permanent joins, which, you know, we refined and learned a lot and still learned a lot in filming about what works and what doesn't work. And if I were to do it again, I'd do it differently again, because we really have to not only have them be flexible and removable, but when the walls are together in the corner, there needs to be no ability for light to come through. And that is the biggest challenge I think we faced, was figuring out ways to make sure that the light just didn't come through. Wonderful, wonderful tool out there is black tape. It's, you know, I swear by it. It's the best thing out there. It blocks off a lot of that light, but you still need to be able to have a stable connection. So we got really creative and experimented, and each unit sort of had, in some cases, a different technique depending on what the interior was like. Because you not only have to worry about whether it's removable, but are you trying to join up wallpaper? Are you trying to marry up, equipment or windows or doors, or is it a painted floor, carpet on the floor? All those things, that has to be considered as well. And then you can get into the lighting, because in addition to having a wall removed, if you've got the ceiling removed, that removes the light as well. Does that matter? Do you need some other way to have the light show up? In the exterior shots of the buildings, some rooms had lights on and some not, and that may change over the course of filming. So you need to be able to switch lights on and off, as well as maybe open or close the curtains. So even a large exterior building, you needed access to the individual rooms just to change the setting a little bit. So it's, people maybe think we're crazy, but to me, all of that is fun. That is just plain fun. I think if you're a puzzle lover, you can understand. If you like figuring things out and you like solving puzzles, that's what this is all about. Solving a puzzle and figuring out how to make it work. Because yes, we can do it. We just need to figure out how.
Exactly.
I could ask you guys questions for hours and hours, but I'll ask you one last question here. What was it like to get your first credit in the film industry as the leaders of the art department for this film, when you weren't necessarily expecting to be working in TV and film? What was that experience like?
Iris, you're vibrating.
It was amazing for me. It was like a dream come true. I've always been interested in the arts. I took costume design for 2 years. So I really, really wanted, and my heart was in the arts. But I thought, how will I ever get there? And then when this came along, thank you, Jackie and crew, I thought, whoa. And so I was beyond excited, beyond. Some trepidation, yes, but you learn to get over that, and you just go with the flow. And it was the best part of my life in my later years.
Yeah, there's something you can't quite beat, whether it's to see your name up on that great big screen is pretty awesome. Especially since this is not a field in which I have any expertise, as you say. Have I ever been in the film industry? No. It's an honor to have my name there, and I have I don't know, it's hard to find the words for it, but it's just a really, really neat feeling to know that you were able to do something of that magnitude. To enjoy doing it, to do it with friends, to do it with very capable, talented, artistic people who don't mind that you're learning and you don't know anything about their industry. And yeah, seeing the credits there was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say I think what you guys did was incredible. I think you took an enormous challenge and rose to it. And you were a wonderful art department, and the film is so lucky to have both of your talents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both also for talking with me tonight about the process.
Happy to.
Yes, our pleasure.
Okay.